Let's talk about a minimum Windows form application. I'll go over some of the details. We're going to look at empty projects for a handwritten example as well as a Visual Studio example. And then I'll show you an example that's also handwritten that will put a little bit more in the form of controls and things like that onto the actual Windows form, and it looks a little bit better and you'll see more details, but we need to take a look at what the application itself is doing. If you want to follow along, you can look within your projects. You can see that we have an empty project, which is from Visual Studio, empty project CSC, which is going to be the command line compiler, and then we have by hand, Windows by hand, and that's going to be a handwritten project as well. We'll also look at the Visual Studio .NET examples as we move forward. Alright, so what I do is I just look at the empty project CSC first. And you can build these very easily from the command line. If we just drag this into PrimalScript, we'll look in PrimalScript because what we're doing is just looking at the code and I want to have some nice color coding. You can do it in any text editor. It's really not a problem. You can also build within Primal Code if you want to. You can build within Visual Studio or you can just build from the command line. But this bat file allows us to compile like the command line compilers we were using before. You can put more references as you need them. But you can see we're creating a WinExe now using the /t argument there instead of just the exe. And then we have our class name, and then it'll default to that empty CSC project. In any event, you could do that. We'll do that along the way. When you're looking at a basic generic Windows form application, you're looking at using system.windows.forms. This is going to give us the functionality to work with the forms, as you can see. Now, furthermore, we have just a regular namespace here. If you want to use that, no problem. Now, what we do is put the colon and then the form name. This is the form name. It's also the class name, of course. This is the first form that we're working with. We're going to derive from, using the colon, inherit from that form. You could also add more here in the form of system.windows.forms.form if you wanted to, but you could just put it form since we're using system.windows.forms. No problem. Then we have a constructor if you need to do any construction type work. We'll look at that later and how Visual Studio handles that. And as we slide down, all we're going to do is look for a dispose here, which is going to clean up our form. This isn't necessarily needed in a example such as this, because we could just eliminate that and not override it as we saw within our object-oriented section, because we're not doing anything in the minimum example. But this is just to show you, because this is going to come up, you're going to scratch your head and say, well, what is this doing? This is overriding the base form dispose method here. This allows us to dispose of or clean up our forms if any of that is needed to be done. You want to keep this as clean as possible and use it as needed. You'll see other examples later on, but you definitely want to not put anything in here that you don't necessarily need, but this is how you would dispose of things. And notice that we're just doing a try catch. If we had exceptions, you could catch for the exceptions here if you wanted to, and at the end we're calling the base dispose method. We're doing whatever we want to, and then we're calling the base dispose. So it goes to the base and executes any code there. We also have the threading that's going to be used normally with the console application as well for your single-threaded apartment model. But you just put that there. And then we have our main entry point again, just like a console application, except we're doing application.run. And we'll talk all about application.run, including some advanced functionality. But for the most part, we're just calling our class. You can do this a different way if you wanted to. You could do it by creating a form, and that would have to work with your form just like you would any other class, and we'll see this later as well. And then you could call application run with the form passed. If you wanted to do it that way. And then you can manipulate that variable f as you need to, instead of doing it all on one line. But this is a basic empty project. It's just going to load up a form. If we were to run the bat file, this is just going to execute that and disappear. You could run it from a local version of the command line if you want it to, and then you can see exactly what happens, but it just compiles it because we've already seen that. And then this is our basic window. You have your normal menu over here that you can restore and move around and things like that, minimize, maximize. This is all standard, built into the application, just one regular form, a default size. That's resizable, of course. And then you have on by default, minimize, maximize, and close. Just a standard basic form. Our next example, we've already seen bat, so we can get rid of that. This is written in the Visual Studio.NET.